In the beginning was matter, and matter begot the amoeba begot the bacteria begot the worm begot the fish begot the amphibian, we get a little feedback there, aren't we? The amphibian gave us a little feedback, sounds like. The amphibian begot the reptile begot the lower mammal begot the lemur begot the monkey begot the man who imagined God. So goes the history of man. That is almost a verbatim quote from a man by the name of Charles Smith. And in a nutshell, Mr. Smith has put for us the idea of atheistic evolution. Here's how that idea goes in most of your textbooks or in your science TV programs or movies that you might watch that deal with the theme. Supposedly about 13.82 billion years ago, there was a huge explosion that they call the Big Bang. That explosion, 10 to the negative 43 seconds after it, supposedly there was something called inflation. That inflation supposedly sped everything in the world up to faster than the speed of light. And then ultimately that slowed down. There was only one atom supposedly, and that was hydrogen. It started causing stars to form. Those stars started cooking elements and exploding. About 4.8 billion years ago, the sun started coalescing out of material made out of other stars. And then the earth started coalescing around the sun from the gravitational pull. And then we started evolving because lightning hit something like a primordial soup that caused amino acids to form, or they adjusted that actually a couple years ago and said it couldn't have happened on the surface of the earth. It must have happened in a deep hydrothermal vent, somewhere in the ocean. That's what you're told. In fact, what you're told is the intelligent people believe that. What you're told is that if you would think through the evidence, that's the conclusion that you would come to, that there is no God, that we are here as products of blind chance, random processes over multiplied millions of years. That's what you're told by some people. There's another idea. I'd say you're fairly familiar with it too. It goes something like this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God separated the light from the darkness, and the light He called day, the darkness He called night, and evening and a morning, day one. And then subsequently, day two, God created the expanse, what we would call the sky. Day three, God created the flowers, grass, and trees. Day four, sun, moon, and stars. Day five, birds and fish. Day six, animals and man. And on the seventh day, He ceased His creative activity. Now, I dare say you're quite familiar with that idea as well. At the present, in the United States of America, about 7% of people claim to be atheist or agnostics. An atheist is someone who says there is no God. I know there's not, and you should know there's not as well. A meaning no, theos meaning, or theos meaning God, atheos, atheism, there is no God. About 3.5% claim to be atheist. Another 3.5 to 4% are agnostics. Agnostic is a word that describes a person who says, I don't think there's a God. I've never seen that God. I don't think there's enough evidence for God. I'm just going to live like there's not one. I can't say with 100% probability, but I don't think there is. Now that's about 7%. About 90% or so say we think that there is an intelligent creator of some sort. Now, when you look at that, you think, okay, more people, a lot more people believe in a God than don't. That's just 7%. Let me break that down for you just a little bit. That's 7% of the people who would be over 16 or so that were polled. And when you look at the population of the United States of America, there's about 330 million people in the U.S. 7% of 330 million is about 22 million. When you start to break that number down a little bit, understanding that out of those 330 million, probably 130 or so are below the age of 15, then you're looking at over 10% of the people say there is not a God, or I don't think there is. Now, let me put it in a little more perspective. In Huntsville, Alabama, there are about 180,000 people, getting close to 200,000. 22 million is, if you were to take the city of Huntsville, Alabama, and multiply it by 5, you would have 1 million. And then you multiply that there by 20. So you're looking at Huntsville, Alabama. You take 110 cities that are filled with people as thickly populated as Huntsville, and that's how many unbelievers we have in the United States today. I'm going to put a little more perspective. Birmingham, Alabama, if you've ever driven through Birmingham, about 5:15 on any type of weekday, you understand that it's fairly densely populated. Got about 1 million people, counting all of the suburbs and areas around Birmingham. 22 cities the size of Birmingham, Alabama, filled with people who say there is not a God. To put it in real life, that means you as a generation are going to be dealing with unbelief to a degree that is unprecedented in the history of the United States of America. You understand what I'm saying? There are more people who are unbelievers now than there ever have been in the history of our country. And it just so happens that the polls tell us that the group of unbelievers is the fastest growing group in the United States of religious groups. Do you think you need to know and be able to answer the question, is there a God? Do you think that you need to be able to say, I know there is a God and this is how I know it? I'll tell you, you're going to have to be able to know that, and you're going to have to be able to answer it. When I first started speaking on Christian evidences, it was probably going on 17 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that. I asked the question, do you know someone who doesn't believe in God? You know, if you had asked my youth group that when I was growing up 20 years ago, out of 50 of us, maybe one of us would have known someone who didn't believe in God. The last group I asked was there in Madison, right outside of Huntsville here. Had about 86 kids in the basement there doing a Wednesday night talk on Christian evidences and the existence of God. I asked them, how many of you know someone who doesn't believe in God? Out of the 86, there were so many hands, I couldn't count them all. So I said, put your hands down. How many of you don't? And out of the 86 kids we had there, about 4 of them raised their hands. You understand what I'm saying? In 20 years, we have gone from maybe one person knowing somebody who doesn't believe in God to 80 out of 86 or so. It's a question that you're going to have to be able to answer. I was in Sullivan, Illinois not long ago, in fact about 2 months ago, and a 10-year-old came up to me. Little sandy-haired 10-year-old, smiley, excited about life. His uncle had said, let me tell you what happened to Matthew. Matthew was in his class, I think it was about a 4th grade class, and his teacher was playing a video on evolution, talking about how humans evolved over multiplied millions of years. And Matthew said he got so upset by the video, he just was irritated with it. He could hardly even watch it. And so after the video, he stood up and started talking to the teacher, and he said, you know, I don't know the teacher's name, Mr. Smith. You know, Mr. Smith, that's not right. Evolution is not true. God created everything. And he looked around the class and he said, a lot of these kids here believe in Jesus, and they'll tell you that they do, and they'll tell you they believe in God just like I'm telling you that. And he said out of all those kids in his class that he knew believed in God and believed in Jesus Christ as God's Son, not a single one of them would stand with Matthew. And let me tell you something. We need people who know there's a God, but we need people who are going to be able and willing and bold enough and courageous enough and gutsy enough to say, I know there's a God, and I'm going to proudly and boldly with love stand for that knowledge. I'm going to stand up and be counted and explain in the kindest, most easy to understand way that I can that there is a God, and I am on His side no matter what you do. You see, what we've been told is the reason that we believe in God is because, well, I'll tell you why. You were born in Tennessee, you were born in Alabama, you were born in Georgia, you were born in Mississippi. Just so happens you believe in God because where you were born, your geography, that's what your atheistic friends and the people that they read are telling you. You don't believe in God because you've thought through it. You don't believe in God because you've looked at the evidence. You believe in God because you love your mama and your grandmama makes the best fried pies you've ever tasted and she makes the best, pumpkin pie you've ever eaten. And because you like your grandmama so much and she tells you there's a God, hey, grandma can't be wrong, and so that's why you believe there is one. That's what you're told. In fact, you're told that when you come to events like this, you check your brains at the door, and people like me, you just sit there and you just let us dump whatever we want to into your minds without critically assessing it, and that's why you believe in God. That's what you're told. That's not true. In fact, the Bible, in a very succinct statement, says the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. In that particular verse, it's using the term the fool to describe a person who has not thought through and accurately and correctly assessed the evidence available to him. I was doing a debate just outside of Columbia. Actually, it was there in Columbia, South Carolina. But the Wednesday night before the Thursday debate, I was at a congregation right there in the area. And it was a little bitty congregation. I looked it up and I was trying to get to it. They were meeting at a scout campground. And I hardly found it, but I got there, found it. I think there were about 30 people or so that were there. And when I got there, what I found to be so interesting, I think it was providential at the time, was out of the 30, 40 people there or so, 2 men came up to me afterward, and I explained what I was doing in the Columbia, South Carolina area. They said, oh, you're going to be doing a debate on the existence of God? I said, yes. They said one of them was 19, the other one was 40, I think he said he was, and the 19-year-old and the 40-year-old said, we were both atheists. And a congregation of 40 people had 2 people in that congregation that were atheists, and I looked them in the eye and I said, what caused you to change? And both of them, without hesitation, said, we started looking at the evidence, and when we did, we realized that the evidence doesn't validate atheistic evolution. The evidence shows there is a God. You know, if you wanted to look at some of that evidence, we've got books and books and videos on it. We've got hours and hours of material on it. I'm just going to give you a few pieces of the evidence that prove overwhelmingly that there is an intelligent, all-powerful, supernatural creator that brought you into existence. And then I'm going to show you at the end of this lesson why that's so valuable to know. You see, that idea that a tiny little ball of something, they call it a singularity, exploded and brought the universe into existence. The first fundamental problem with it is it's an unscientific idea. Now let me tell you what I mean by unscientific. There is a law that you use every day. You've been using it for years. I've been talking about it for about as long as I've been at AP. It's called the law of cause and effect. Real simple to understand. Law of cause and effect says that for every material effect you see, there is a cause that came before it and that was greater than it. Now you say, okay, Kyle, so we understand that, no big deal. Yeah, it's easy to understand. The law of cause and effect says that effects don't spontaneously occur, don't just happen without causes. Now work with me. Suppose that you're listening to what I'm saying. In fact, you are so engrossed in what I'm saying, you're not thinking about what you're going to eat at the Havoc game. You're not thinking about that guy or girl you saw earlier this afternoon and the number that you're going to text them at. You're not, like I said, it's hypothetical, but work with me. Just think like that's going on. You're paying so close attention that all of a sudden, one of these light bulbs shoots across the room, smashes into the back wall. It's going 95 miles an hour. You hear the crash. You say, Kyle, what caused that? And I say, oh, nothing. Sometimes light bulbs just spontaneously shoot across rooms going 95 miles an hour. Just blow up. It happens all the time. Well, not all the time, but occasionally it does. That's unscientific. It's just not the way things work. There is a law, and the reason it's called a law is because there's never been a single exception to it ever. Now, here's what we are told. 13.82 billion years ago, there was a tiny singularity of stuff that exploded. And you stop and ask the simple question, okay, where did you get the tiny ball of stuff? What caused it? It's a material effect. Everybody recognizes that that's the case. What caused it? Now I'm going to tell you the current most scientific, now put that in quotations, atheistic answer to how that little ball of stuff came into existence. There's a man by the name of Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking wrote a book called The Grand Design. Here's why he wrote it. Because several years ago, he wrote another book that left room for the idea that there could be a God. His atheistic colleagues said, Stephen Hawking, you left room for the idea that there's a God in your other books. I want you to close that gap. We want you to shut that door. There's not a God, they say, and we want you to make sure that in this next book, you don't leave room for one. And so that was basically the stated purpose of his Grand Design book. He started talking about the universe, Stephen Hawking did. Maybe you've seen him before. He's got Lou Gehrig's disease. He's been on Curiosity, I think on the History Channel, some things like that. He gets around in a wheelchair. He does sold out lectures to tens of thousands of people where he sits in his chair and picks sections of writing and text that he wants to be read by a robotic voice. He's a theoretical physicist and probably most well known in the world as one of the smartest men alive. And he was addressing the problem that the atheistic community has of where the tiny singularity came from that they say exploded. And here's what he said. He said, well, suns, like a star, they don't just pop into existence out of nothing. He said black holes, they don't just pop into existence out of nothing. But whole universes do. They just pop into existence, he said, out of nothing. Do you know that's the most unscientific idea that a person could put forth? That there is a material effect like our universe that did not have a cause. Not only is it unscientific, it's unbiblical. The fact of the matter is that true science and the Bible always agree. If you were to go to Romans chapter 1 and you were to look in verse 20, here's what you would read. For since the beginning of creation, God's invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things which are made. And here are the two things you can see about God from the things that are made. Even his eternal power. You know, the fact of the matter is there had to be a cause for the material effect of the universe. The atheistic community has to say, no, there wasn't a cause. And then if you were then to ask, have you ever seen a material effect come into existence or occur without a cause? They have to say, no, we've never seen it. But it had to happen because if it didn't happen, then there would be a... Well, if it didn't happen, then there'd be a... Well, there'd be a God, and we've already ruled out the idea of a God, and so something impossible has to occur, or there is one. Now, the second problem with the atheistic idea of a huge explosion that brings the universe into existence, second problem with it is the cause has to be bigger than the effect. You know how big the effect is? Our universe? Well, nobody really does. They give us guesses all of the time. In fact, lots of times they then change their guesses. Several years ago, they said there are about, you go out in the night sky, you look up at the Milky Way, you see all those beautiful stars. Last night, it was beautiful. It was about 60 degrees in Florence, Alabama. Walked out there, had short sleeves on and shorts, I think, with no shoes on, December 26th. Hadn't done that very much. Normally it's too cold for that. But I walked out and the sky was beautiful. You could see the stars. You know, if you were to look out in that Milky Way galaxy and you were to try to count the stars, you'd run into trouble pretty quick because you can't count them. People have tried in the past and they've run into problems. A little while back, about a decade ago, they said, well, it looks like there are about 100 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy. 100 billion. How much is 100 billion? You know, if you were to count to 10,000 every single day. Now, I don't know why you would want to count to 10,000 every single day. Sometimes I use my son as an illustration. My son Drew's 13 now. When he was about 5, he would get up earlier than my wife and I sometimes on a Saturday. One day we got up and I said, Drew, you got up earlier than we did. What were you doing? He said, well, I was just laying in my bed. I said, really, what were you doing in your bed? He said, counting. What were you counting? He said, nothing, I was just counting. What'd you count to? He said, 3,000. You ever got up on a Saturday? Sun just streaming through the blinds a little bit. It's about 5:30 in the morning. You think, today is, I'm going to start counting. I'm going to start counting to 3,000. Sounds like a great, I have never. I don't know if you have ever. Drew's the only person that, if you have, would you come and tell me about it? Because I've been abusing Drew with this illustration for years, and no one has ever told me they got up in the morning and counted to 3,000 or 4 or 5. But let's say you got up every morning, you counted to 10,000. 10,000 every single day of every single year. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Every one of those numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, every one counts for a star. The sun is a middle-sized star. You can put 1,000,000 Earths inside the sun. You can put 450 suns inside some of the stars. That means you can put 450 million Earths inside some of the stars, and you can rattle them off with the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, every one of those. Now, they told us there are 100 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy. They told us that you count to 10,000 every single day. It's not going to take you 100 years. It's not going to take you 1,000 years. Not 10,000, not 20,000. It's going to take you 27,000 years to count to the number 100 billion. About 2 years ago, they came out and they said, we were wrong. You don't have 100 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy. You got 300 to 400 billion. Okay, 27 times 3. 27,000 years times 3. Oh, and then that's just the stars in one galaxy. How many galaxies are there out there? They suggest to us that there are 100 billion galaxies. So you can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 9, 10 to 10,000 every single day for 27,000 years, and you might get to count to the number of galaxies we've got, and that's in a universe. Oh, here, by the way, for years they said the universe was about, they said it was about 20 billion light years across. These numbers bugging you yet? 20 billion light years. That's if you could stand on this side of the universe and you could go the speed of light, 186,000 miles a second, then you're going to get across the universe in 20 billion years. Oh, and then they came back 6 months ago and they said, nope, not 20 billion. Actually, it's going to be about, I think they said this time about 43 billion. And then they concluded their paragraph with this. But some Oxford scientists think it might be 250 times that. Okay, all right. And what caused that? Let me ask you a question. In our little illustration, that light shooting across the room going 95 miles an hour, if I were to say, no, we all know that doesn't spontaneously happen. Here's what really happened. I was speaking, you were listening, and all of a sudden there was a little particle of dust. And that little particle of dust landed on that metal pole, and it broke it in half and shot that light all the way across the room going 95 miles an hour. You know what you say? No, it didn't. The cause is not big enough. You see, because the law of cause and effect says that for every effect, there has to be a cause that came before it, was simultaneous to it, and was greater than it. And let me ask you a question. What's greater than a 43 billion light year universe or 250 times that light year universe? What's bigger than that? Now go back to your Romans chapter 1. For since the beginning of creation, God's invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things which he made, even his eternal power. In Psalm 19, when the Bible said the heavens declare the glory of God and the firmament shows his handiwork, day unto day utters speech, night unto night utters knowledge. There is no voice, there is no language where their sound is not heard. You know what that means? It means it doesn't matter if you're in Florence, Alabama, and you're looking up at the stars. It doesn't matter if you're in the Himalayas. It doesn't matter if you're in South Korea. It doesn't matter if you're in California. The stars are saying the same thing to you in whatever language you speak, and that is, there is a God. Oh, and then there's another aspect to this. Truth is, we could go on and on. The final discussion we'll have this evening is simply the idea that huge explosions don't cause order. They cause disorder. Now, that's a scientific fact. It's real easy to understand. Whenever you see design, you know there had to be a designer. When you look at the things in this universe and the way that they are ordered, even the atheistic community has come up with this idea. Here's what they say. They say it looks like our earth is poised in something that they call a Goldilocks zone. You remember Goldilocks? Ah, yeah, Goldilocks. Oh, she goes into the woods and she sees the cottage there, and previously in the cottage there had been some bears, and they were pulling up to the table for their breakfast, and they were about to eat some porridge. You know why those bears are gone? Because they were eating porridge. I mean, what, porridge? You ever eaten porridge for breakfast? You know, the closest thing I know to porridge is oatmeal. And the way my mom used to make oatmeal, it didn't come in those little fancy packs that you could open and had the pre-sugar dried fruit in them. No. My mom would put, no offense to my mom, she's a wonderful lady, I love her. She's great. But oatmeal, in my mind, as I remember it, she would put a spoon down in there, and the whole thing would come up in the shape of a pan. And then if we didn't eat it, she just threw it out to the horse out back. If you can eat the same stuff the horse does in the morning, well, okay, the bears have sat down to porridge, and they've realized that's a bad idea, and it's too hot for them, so they leave. Goldilocks comes up, and she sits down at Daddy Bear's. It's too hot. Mama Bear's too cold. Baby Bear's, remember about his porridge? Just right. Goes to the chair, living room. Daddy Bear's too hard. Mama Bear's too soft. Baby Bear's just right. Goes up to the beds. Daddy Bear's too hard. Mama Bear's too soft. Baby Bear's just right. Even the atheistic community says, we don't know how it happened, but it looks like the universe that we've got is just right. And I'll tell you why it looks like that. It's because the Bible explains that God created it to be inhabited. It's just right because it is perfectly designed and ordered for you to live in it. Now, when you see design, you know that didn't come about through mindless chance processes over multiplied millions of years from an initial explosion. It just doesn't make any sense. You know how this would work. Let's say we took a cell phone. Let's say it was a nice working cell phone, and we had it up here, and I said, guys, this is your new iPhone 7. It's got all kinds of bells and whistles. It's really great. And I had a hammer, and I smashed it, and I threw it in a box. And I said, I'd like to get this back working. Let's see how we can do that. And I lit a M80, threw it in the box, shook it up. And I said, guys, you know what we're going to have now? And I opened that box, and I reached my hand down in there, and you know what I pulled out? Well, I didn't pull out a working cell phone. Guarantee you that, because an M80 blowing up a bunch of pieces that could work and did seconds before is not going to cause any more order than you had. In fact, you're not going to have more order, you're going to have less. You know why? You didn't blow it up enough times. How many times do you need to blow it up to get the cell phone to work? How many times do you need to get a bigger explosion? There was a man by the name of Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer in the early 90s killed 18 people. Actually, I think he confessed to murdering 19 of them. I think he was sentenced to 900 years of prison for killing 17 of them. In 1995, he was in a Stone Phillips interview. Stone Phillips asked him, he said, why did you think you could do that? Why do you think you could kill other people like that and not be accountable, not be responsible? Let me tell you why you need to know that there is a God, because what Jeffrey Dahmer says to his question by Stone Phillips is why you need to know him. He said, I always believed the lie of evolution. And I believed that I was an accident and I was a blob of primordial slime. He said, and I thought what one blob of primordial slime did to another blob of primordial slime didn't matter. And that's why I did the things that I did to 19 people who are now dead. Stone Phillips said, well, what changed your mind? Jeffrey Dahmer looked over at his dad, who was sitting in the chair beside him, and he said, Dad, when you sent me that creation science material, and I realized there was a God and that evolution was not true, I realized I had done something terribly wrong. You see, because there's something that comes with the idea of God. You never get rid of the idea of God because of the evidence. There aren't 22 million people in the United States of America who have assessed the evidence with an honest heart and said, I don't believe there's a God. There are 22 million people in the United States of America who have another reason for coming to that conclusion, and it's not the evidence. You see, if you come to the conclusion that there is a God, then you realize you're responsible to that Creator. Then you owe Him something. Then the fact that He exists demands that your behavior, well, it demands that you keep that behavior in line with your Creator's will. In 1976, there was a debate down in Denton, Texas, between a man named Thomas B. Warren and Anthony Flew. Anthony Flew, at the time in 1976, was the world's leading atheist. He wrote a paper that he delivered to the Socratic Society that was overseen by C.S. Lewis, that was the most widely distributed atheistic philosophical paper for the next 5 decades. For 50 years. 5,000 people every night showed up to that debate. Thomas B. Warren asked Dr. Flew, do you believe there's a God? Dr. Flew was debating that there was not. One of the arguments that Thomas Warren used, it was real simple. He put up a picture of a prosthetic limb, an artificial hand, and he said, Dr. Flew, did this hand have a designer? Dr. Flew said, yeah, that prosthetic, that artificial limb did. He put up a picture of a human hand, and he said, did this hand have a designer? Dr. Flew said, no, didn't. Dr. Warren said, well, how did it get there? Dr. Flew said, it just grew there. Just grew. That was in 1976. The transcript of that and the video came out in 1977. 30 years later, Dr. Flew had been talking, debating, writing, and he said his mode of operation always was to follow the evidence where it leads. 30 years later, he wrote a book, and the title of that book was There Is No God. The no was marked out. The actual title was There Is a God, How the World's Most Notorious Atheist Became a Believer. When you read Dr. Flew's book in 2007, he's an octogenarian at the time. He's 80 years old, 80 years plus. I think he's 82. He says, I've always in my life followed one rule, and that's to follow the evidence where it leads. He said, science has uncovered so much information about DNA and design in our universe that it is impossible to no longer believe in a God. He said, the evidence proves that there is an eternal, all-powerful, supernatural, intelligent Creator behind our existence. That's exciting in one way. Let me tell you the sad part of it. They asked Dr. Flew, okay, so you're following the evidence where it leads. You've come to the conclusion that there is a God. People like Richard Dawkins hated it. They said, well, he's old and senile. He's trying to hedge his bets because he's about to die and he wants to at least have a chance at an afterlife. He said, no, that's not true. And bam, 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 systematically demolished every one of their arguments against his. But then they asked him, they said, well, Dr. Flew, have you decided to look at a religion? He said, well, I haven't really. He said, I believe that if I looked into it, Christianity would have more evidence in its favor and answer more questions and might be right more than any other religion in the world. But I'm going to leave that to somebody else. I'm going to stop at the existence of God. The existence of an intelligent Creator. James chapter 2 explains to us that even the demons believe and they tremble. The idea that we can get you to a belief in God, the fact of the matter is, if anybody is honest and if anybody is trying to assess the real evidence that's available, they have to come to that conclusion. And the reason that a person doesn't come to that conclusion is because they want something other than the truth. But the real question for you tonight is not, do you believe that there's a God? The real question for you tonight is, when Matthew stands up in your class, or a girl that I heard about on the campus of University of North Alabama, the campus minister came to him and he said, let me tell you what happened on our campus. There was a young lady who was in a class with an atheistic professor. The atheistic professor said, how many of you believe in God? One person stood up. She came back to the student center and she was furious. The minister said she wasn't mad at the professor. She expected that out of an unbeliever like him. She was furious because there was a class full of people who believed in God that she knew, and none of them would stand for the truth. What is it that has gotten some of us so scared to stand up and say, I know there's a God, I know His Son is Jesus Christ, and I'm going to do what He says no matter what? Is the world so alluring? Is popularity and whatever else it is so enticing that we sit in our seats and refuse to stand and be counted for our God? Don't let that be you. If you believe that there's a God in here tonight, great. It's just a step, though, in the next more important question. If you believe that there's a God, are you going to do what He's asked you to do? You see, Dr. Flew said, oh, there might be, but I'm done with my quest. Those students in that class said, well, we think there is, but they kept sitting down and they weren't going to be counted for His name. Are you a follower of your Creator? Have you repented of your sins and been baptized into Christ and been added to the family of God? Are you willing to stand up and be counted for the Creator that brought you into existence? If you haven't been willing to do that, but you know you need to start, don't let tonight go by without making a decision for the Creator.